ReZero, Volume 1, Chapter 5, Part 2, Starting Life in Another World. Subaru dove into Felt at about hip level, and while hugging her light body, tumbled across the ground. Just before he hit the ground, he felt something metal scrape across the back of his head, which made all his hair stand on end. But feeling the weight of the person in his arms, he did his absolute best to ignore it, and kept rolling to put as much distance as possible from where they were before. When at last Subaru looked back, standing on his knees, Elsa was staring back at him in surprise. Feeling as though he had pulled one over on Elsa, Subaru couldn't help but smile back, awkwardly but proudly. "Are you all right?" he said to Felt. "I was desperate there, so if I accidentally touched somewhere I shouldn't have, please forgive me, okay?"
If you hadn't said that, I would have thanked you like normal. But why?
"I don't know. My body moved on its own. If I had to give a reason... Well, you don't know about this, but with this now, we're totally even, okay? Remember that. We're even now," said Subaru, clenching his fist after he let Felt go. The second time around, Felt had saved Subaru from Elsa's blade. That memory didn't mean anything in the world this time around, but with this, he was able to repay his debt. Subaru thought that even so, his debt should be returned, so nothing about what he needed to do before had changed. "Listen here, Felt. Right now I'm going to do the same sort of thing as Rom did before he was knocked out to help stall for time. When that happens, I'll be sure to open up a window for you, so I want you to use that opportunity to run out of here as fast as you can. You got it?"
What? No. Are you telling me to just turn tail and flee?
Said Felt, glaring up at Subaru with her red eyes, but Subaru just got closer and stared right back at her. As he did so, he was sure not to miss the moment when Felt looked as though she was scared at what Subaru was trying to say. "Yes, that's what I'm telling you to do. Turn tail and flee. To be honest, that's exactly what I want to do right now. I don't want to stay another second in this violent space," said Subaru, panting Felt roughly on her head. As Felt started to say, "But," Subaru interrupted her and continued. "You're 15 and I'm 17. Out of all of us, you're probably the youngest one here, so it's the right thing to do to give you the highest possibility of getting out of here alive. It's what's only natural."
Don't give me that. You were just shaking yourself a minute ago.
"That was then. This is now. I'm not shaking now, so it's okay. Really, before I remember and start shaking, I've got to do this now, okay? So get ready to run." Subaru put his hand on Felt's forehead as she looked as though she were going to object again, and then pulled himself to his feet. Not far away on the ground was Rom's club. It looked really heavy, but Subaru thought he would still be able to swing it. As Nosatella continued to shoot barrages of ice at Elsa, there was not a sign of dullness in her movements as she danced to avoid the shots. In the first place, Subaru wasn't really sure if he, faced with a superhuman like Elsa with absolutely no real fighting experience himself, could open up a window for Felt to run. All that he could do was wordlessly spring a surprise attack on her when she wasn't paying attention to him. So right after Elsa had swung her knife and shattered a large icicle, and Subaru was completely in one of her blind spots, Subaru sprang forwards at her, forgetting even to breathe, and swung the club down on her. Perhaps Subaru's adrenaline had finally kicked in, because the speed of his swing was far faster than he had imagined it would be. It sliced through the air towards the back of her head, and... "You picked the right moment and angle to target me, but unfortunately, I could have sensed your intent to kill a mile away." "Intent to kill? I have no idea how I'm supposed to hide that." In order to block the swing that came directly behind her, Elsa struck the club with the blunt edge of her blade, changing the course of the swing enough for it to miss its mark. However, at that very instant, Subaru opened his mouth wide, with his teeth bared, and yelled, "Now, Felt! Run!" Like a spring, Felt launched her small body onto the wind and raced forwards. She was going so fast that Subaru couldn't keep track of her with his eyes, and the girl, now turned to wind, rushed to the exit. "Do you really think I'd let you go?" To stop Felt, Elsa took another knife out of her breast pocket and threw it toward Felt, as if it were a symbol of payback for what Felt did before. The simple undecorated knife flew straight at her back. However, "Too bad. But I want to let her go. Subaru kicked the round table that was beside him upwards, which collided with the knife and sent it off course. Man, I'm awesome. That was awesome. Wow, my toe hurts more than I thought it was going to. Huh? Maybe it was Subaru's adrenaline again, or some power that had awakened in him that had failed to activate the last 3 times. But as Elsa's long leg came up and kicked him in the side of the head and sent him flying, his self-congratulations were cut short. He was hit so hard the world seemed to spin around, and together with the onset of pain and taste of blood in his mouth, Subaru threw up. That's the first time in a long time someone's made me actually a little bit angry. Well, that's something I'm happy to hear. Serves you right. I'll let one of us get away. Subaru stood back up and pretended to be in better shape than he was, doing his best to continue drawing Elsa's attention. As if Elsa had read Subaru's mind, she smiled at him and forgot about Felt for the time being. Fine. If that's what you want, I'll pay attention to you. Your dancing had better not bore me. I'm going to go ahead and warn you, but if you're going to dance with me, you better be careful. I haven't learned a thing about dancing, so I'll be sure to step all over your feet, said Subaru, spitting out the blood that had arisen in his mouth. He readjusted his grip on the club that was still in his hands. It wasn't as though Subaru was going to have very many chances to land a hit, so he used everything he had to focus on striking Elsa as she rushed towards him. You better not forget about me, said Natsatella, along with a chunk of ice lobbed from behind. But without even looking back, Elsa swung her blade and broke the ice to pieces. With Elsa's superhuman senses on full display, even Subaru wasn't able to keep taunting her. I'm starting to get a little tired of this game. Are you sure you'll be able to keep me entertained? Asked Elsa in a low tone, with her smile the color of blood. As Subaru gazed at her smile, he felt a shiver run down his spine and looked over at Natsatella to make eye contact. If you got some kind of hidden true power available, I think that now would be a great time to use it. I do have another trick up my sleeve, but if I use it, I'll be the only one left alive. I would like it if you held back on that then. No self-destructs, please. Okay, fine, I get it. Damn. Use it if you have to, but don't be too hasty, alright? Subaru intended that to be a joke, in order to help shake off some of his cowardice, but Natsatella took Subaru's statement seriously. After seeing him take a deep breath and solidify his determination, Natsatella's lips relaxed into an almost smile. I won't use it. I can't while you're still trying your best. You can do this, so keep on struggling. Relying on the power of one's parents is my absolute final option, replied Natsatella. As she said that, she really did look as though she was running out of options, and that lit a fire inside Subaru. In one way, Natsatella looked as though she was just about ready to give up. At the same time, she looked ready to accept the fact that Subaru was weak and wouldn't help much. To Subaru, Natsatella was someone who, no matter how tough things got, would never look down and give up, because that was the way she was. Subaru had worked so hard to see her smile. Subaru had died several times and come this far in order to save her. He hadn't come this far just to see her give up. I didn't see anything right now. What? This conversation we just had. It didn't happen. I just remembered the reason I'm here. Just leave it to me, damn it. I'm gonna make sure you never have to use that final option of yours. Subaru pointed at Natsatella and then at Elsa, and made his declaration. He spit as he did, stomped on the ground, and let all of his emotions howl out from his soul. I'm gonna blow you away, and we're going to have ourselves a happy ending. You don't belong here, so scram! Well, don't you look overexcited, replied Elsa. I'm just ready to give it my all. This time is going to be the climax. I've got a lot more energy than before. As Elsa leaned forward, Subaru swung the club as if he was declaring he was going to hit a home run. Elsa's lips then curled into a smile, and she melted away into the darkness. From such a low height that it looked as though she was crawling on the ground, Elsa slid towards Subaru. As he kept his eyes on the dull glint of her blade, Subaru swung the club with all his might. Subaru's swing held nothing back. He was prepared to beat Elsa to death, but Elsa just ducked even farther, like it was nothing, and was so low it looked as though she was licking the ground. You Spider-Woman! Well, I suppose it's correct to say that you're tangled in my web. As Subaru saw Elsa's sword rising upwards, Subaru quickly threw his body back. However, he still couldn't pull out of the striking range of her sword. Fear raced up Subaru's spine, and without thinking, he kicked up his knee. Even though he hadn't meant to aim his knee anywhere, as Elsa was right in front of him, it landed straight in her stomach. The path of the blade shifted a little, and right in that path came a bluish-white light, followed by a high-pitched sound. An ice shield! Nice cover! I'm not good at making those at a distance. I could have accidentally frozen someone. Her, right? You mean her, right? Replied Subaru with a mix of jest in his thanks. Natsutella continued to draw Elsa back with her barrage of ice. I've started to grow tired of you, little buzzing insect. I think it's about time I wrap this up. Hey, don't underestimate bugs, okay? It's not my fault if you get stung and break out in hives. Well, don't you sound all high and mighty when you're out of my striking range, replied Elsa, as she focused on dodging Natsutella's attacks, while Subaru continued to try to draw her attention away. While Subaru would have loved to try to aim for Elsa's back as she continued to dodge, he didn't want to run the risk of becoming a victim to friendly fire, so he really couldn't move. That was probably the reason that Natsutella's attacks were muted when Subaru made his move before. It was the kind of problem you have to face when working on an improvised team. Subaru continued to watch as Elsa deflected Natsutella's attacks every now and then, diving in with an attack of his own, before retreating again. But he could sense the situation getting worse. If Elsa really wanted to, it was clear that she could quickly take care of Subaru, like she did Rom. The only reason it appeared that they were on equal footing was because Elsa would not divert her full attention to him. Elsa's caution was instead directed to the possibility that the spirit puck would appear again. That was enough to keep the current situation holding. Another reason that Elsa didn't act was because Subaru's cowardice was holding him a step back. He was taking care not to put himself in range of lethal danger. If Subaru had been a brave idiot, she would have cut him down and the balance would have shifted. However, it didn't look as though Subaru's cowardice would serve him much longer. As Elsa's counterattacks grew more severe, Subaru's retreats weren't making it in time, and he was getting slight cuts all over himself. Subaru had cuts on his upper arms, on his calves, his underarms, and even a few cuts on his neck. And as those injuries increased, Subaru's gray tracksuit began to be stained with blood. Damn, it hurts! Ah, how about this? Even though the pain was enough to bring him to tears, Subaru swung a kick, trying to do something new to catch Elsa off guard. However, I'll just take that, said Elsa. Damn. Elsa had easily avoided Subaru's kick, and to top it all off, she'd easily grabbed his leg. Elsa raised her kukri, aiming to lop off the whole leg. With the strength of Elsa's swing, its speed, and the sharpness of the blade, Subaru knew what would happen next. His leg would be cut off at the thigh, and he would die from shock as the loss of blood and pain overwhelmed him. Subaru could see the words, "Bad end," rising up in front of his eyes. I shouldn't have done that, Subaru's thoughts screamed. He tried to raise the club to block, but with the handicap he was facing, with one leg held in the air, he wouldn't make it in time. Natsutella screamed. The cut would mercilessly reach his leg in moments. As Subaru thought of the pain and spilling of blood it would bring, the scream rose in his throat. The blood he would vomit when... That's enough! A flame appeared, burning through the roof from the center of the loop cellar. The flame was filled with the ghastly malice that swept through the room, and stopped even Elsa in her tracks. Subaru's right leg released. He hopped back before falling down. Right before his eyes, in the middle of a rising pillar of smoke, he saw a red, burning, shining figure. That was close. I'm glad I made it in time. Now, you're... The flame wavered and stepped forwards. Its very existence was enough to make Subaru, Natsutella, and Elsa all freeze. Taking in the gazes from everyone present, without being shaken one bit, stood an absolute sense of will. With sky-blue eyes shining with a pure sense of justice, the young man smiled faintly. I think it's time to draw the curtain on this performance, the hero declared, brushing back his red hair. As Felt sped like the wind through the entryway to the loot cellar, She felt as though she had been released from despair. Behind her, Felt could hear the freezing of the air and the sound of metal clanging on ice. She also heard the sound of a blunt object swinging through the air, along with a "hi" and "wah" and other stupid-sounding utterances from someone dodging attacks. The battle still raged on behind her. As Felt's legs started to shake as she ran, she shook her head to try to deny the mess of thoughts running through it. It was clear that if she had stayed behind, she would have been killed. Against an opponent who could knock Rom out with a single blow, Felt didn't have a chance. The same went for that silver-haired half-elf. Without support from her spirit, there was no way that she could win against that woman either. Subaru was even worse off. It was clear that he had little experience fighting, and didn't seem used to it at all. His clean hands and fingers were proof that he had never even tried to hold a weapon before, and his clear hair and skin was proof that he had never been wounded before. In other words, Subaru had lived a sheltered life, one in which it was not necessary to consider fighting. Given that he had such an expensive media on him, it all made sense. Felt should just accept that it served him right. Despite not knowing anything about the world, Subaru had let a notion of chivalry get the best of him and try something far beyond his means. Felt should simply laugh at his idiocy. Subaru went and tried to act cool and let her get away, so he would probably be happy to see her running. But still. Someone! Anyone! Though Felt knew in her mind that she should be winding down alleys, she had run straight towards the main street. Out of breath and with an expression of panic on her face, Felt looked this way and that. This was strange. Felt reached up and frantically rubbed her teary eyes. Even if she had reason to be sad about Rom, Subaru was someone that she'd just met. Why should she care if he died? But Subaru had gotten mad at Elsa for Felt's sake, and he had just about thrown his life away so she could get away alive. Felt didn't understand what she was feeling, but because those feelings were there in her heart, she kept running about. She had felt something in response to Subaru's actions. Because of those feelings, her feverishness did not subside, and while she felt like she wanted to scream, Felt kept running. Then, finally after running down a few streets, "Please, help me." "Understood. I'll help you." She found a young man like red fire and changed the fate of the world. "Reinhardt?" "That is correct, Subaru. I suppose it hasn't been too long since we last met. I'm sorry I'm late." The red-haired young man, Reinhardt, turned to face Subaru, who was still toppled over on the ground with a slight apologetic smile. Even as Reinhardt wiped the dust from his sleeve, every motion seemed trained and deliberate. The way Reinhardt carried himself was different from when Subaru first encountered him in the alley with Dumb, Dumber, and Dumbest. And as Subaru watched him, he thought he was now seeing a glimpse of Reinhardt's true self. Without letting his guard down for a moment, Reinhardt looked ahead and turned his eyes towards the black-clothed beauty who was now focusing her animosity towards him. Reinhardt's blue eyes narrowed, as if he were remembering something. "Black hair and black clothes, and your weapon is the bent blade, particular to the northern countries. With all of those characteristics aligned, there's no mistaking it. You are the bow hunter, aren't you?" "What's with that super-violent-sounding alias?" muttered Subaru. "It's an alias given to her based on the way she kills. She's well known in the capital to be a dangerous individual. However, from what I hear, she appears to be more of a mercenary," replied Reinhardt, faithfully in response to Subaru's rhetorical question, as he trained his clear eyes on Elsa. "Reinhardt, yes, the knight among knights, and of the master swordsman lineage. Well, that's amazing. I never thought I'd meet such an enjoyable opponent. I'll have to thank my employer now for giving this job, now won't I?" "There are many things I would like to ask you. I recommend you surrender. However, would you say to a starving predator, as it stands before its wounded prey, a perfect specimen and already dripping blood, to bear its hunger and move on?" Elsa licked her thin red lips erotically, with a look of ecstasy in her case, as she stared at Reinhardt. "I see," Reinhardt responded, scratching at the side of his cheek as though he wished there was another way. "Subaru, I'm going to have to ask you to get farther away. And please take that elderly man with you out of harm's way. After that, if you could stay beside that other person there, it would help me a lot. Understood. That woman's quite the monster, so don't let your guard down, alright? Fortunately, you could say that fighting monsters is my specialty, said Reinhardt confidently, and walked forwards without any sign that he was preparing himself for battle. Reinhardt did not even reach for the sword at his waist, but continued on, empty-handed. After a sharp intake of breath, the kukri in Elsa's hand flew forwards in a flash, toward Reinhardt's neck. Unlike when Subaru was her opponent, there was no sign that Elsa was holding back as she made her silver strike, and it seemed to kill the very air as it raced towards Reinhardt's slender neck. Yet Reinhardt was completely defenseless. Not only did he not make any move to defend himself, he didn't even make a move to dodge the attack. Subaru could already picture Reinhardt's head flying off his body. However, I don't really want to be violent against a woman, said Reinhardt, striding off in a gentleman way. But Subaru thought that the tone of his voice had dropped. You'll have to excuse me. Reinhardt planted one foot down, the pressure behind it fracturing the ground beneath them, and with the other leg launched a kick so strong it created a shock wave as it collided with Elsa and sent her body flying. The backblast was strong enough for Subaru to feel it where he stood. He was speechless. All it was an ordinary forwards kick, but the air pressure it caused was enough to create a wind that shook the entire building. Elsa, who took the hit head-on, was blown away like a leaf. However, she was able to reduce the damage taken by springing off the walls to kill the force of the impact with her legs. Still, when she looked up, you could see the look of shock on her face. No. There's no way. You're kidding me, right? Just what the hell was that? Subaru had described certain things as being on a totally different scale several times before in his life, and it was at this very moment that he realized he had been mistaken. That phrase, on a totally different scale, existed solely for the purpose to describe this hero who stood in front of him. Before Reinhardt's existence, all of the extraordinary phenomena of this new world dulled in comparison. It's just as they say. Or rather, you're more than what everyone says you are, said Elsa. Well, I can only hope I'll live up to your expectations. Will you not use that sword of yours? I would like to have a taste of its legendary sharpness. Elsa pointed at Reinhardt's sword. She wanted to face Reinhardt at full force, without him holding back. However, Reinhardt shook his head. This sword is made so that it can only be drawn when it should be drawn. The fact that the blade has not removed itself from its sheath means that now is not the proper time. I suppose I have been underestimated. Personally, I would have preferred to take you up on your offer, so... Reinhardt suddenly turned his eyes away from Elsa and looked about the inside of the loot cellar. Eyes eventually settled upon an odd-looking two-handed sword propped up against the wall. Reinhardt used his foot to kick up on the hilt, sending the unsheathed sword spinning through the air. He easily grabbed it in his hand and swung it once lightly as if testing it out. I'll use this one to face you. Any complaints? No. This is wonderful. Wonderful. You had better show me a good time. As Reinhardt gripped his blade, Elsa made the first move, darting to the side. As she made her slicing attack, she leapt to increase its speed. In response, Reinhardt readied a stance to swing his sword from below, straight upwards. In that moment of attack and defense, Subaru was able to get a clear view of what was happening. Reinhardt's strike was sublime. It was magical. It was perfectly trained. In his hands, even a throwaway sword at its end of life, sleeping away in a cellar, shone like some treasured sword passed on by legend across generations. Reinhardt's sword technique captured every ounce of performance that could be extracted by the sword, and he had used it at will. Reinhardt's blade hit its mark, just where the blade of Elsa's kukri met its handle. Despite the fact that it was two pieces of steel striking together, Reinhardt's sword showed an unbelievable amount of cutting power, and sliced the blade of Elsa's blade right off its base. Elsa had no words for the fate of the kukri she held in her hand. The blade had become just a handle. And as for the remainder, now that you have lost your weapon, I recommend you surrender. As Reinhardt turned around, he held the blade of Elsa's kukri in his free hand. With a flick of his wrist, he threw it, and with a sharp sound it stuck, lodged in the wall. Even Subaru could hear Elsa gasp. He really is not normal. I can't even find the energy to joke about it. Subaru just barely squeezed out what he thought and hurried to put distance between himself and the battle taking place. Along the way, Subaru went over to Rom and somehow was able to drag his giant body to a spot along the wall. Rom, old man Rom. Hey, Baldy, you alive?
Who you calling Baldy?
Who else? My only goals in life are to never go bald or get fat. You are, the best example for me of who I don't want to end up like. Even though Rom's response was weak, after giving him a few more slaps on the cheek, Subaru let out a sigh of relief. Other than the fact that Rom had hit his head pretty hard, everything else looked alright. There was a chance that Rom's memory might take a hit, but considering he was alive, it didn't seem like much of a problem. Does it look like that person's going to be alright? Asked Noxatella as she came running up beside Subaru, her long silver hair trailing behind her. Checking the state of Rom's injury, she muttered, "He needs treatment," and her hands began to glow with a faint blue light. Hey now, I'm just saying, but this old man's in league with the one who stole your badge. You know that. That's precisely why I'm doing it. Once I heal him, I can use his gratitude to get information out of him. People don't tend to lie to people who saved their life. I'm only doing this for my own sake. It was like she could not justify any of her actions unless she made a case for them being of her own sake. Subaru gave the ever roundabout Noxatella a weak smile and looked back towards the battlefield. Elsa was on her knees, but Subaru couldn't see her face. All Subaru could think was that Reinhardt had taken away her will to fight. With his old sword down by his side, Reinhardt approached Elsa with his defenses down. Surely Reinhardt had confidence in the difference in ability between himself and Elsa, but pride always leads to the worst possible outcome. An alarm rang inside Subaru's head. Reinhardt! She's got another blade! As Elsa's second kukri was drawn from her waist, he took a bit of Reinhardt's bangs as he leaned back. With her surprise attack evaded, she turned her eyes towards Subaru. I'm surprised you knew. Well, I've already experienced it once before, said Subaru, giving her the middle finger in a bragging tone, although it really couldn't be called bragging. Elsa apparently decided that what Subaru was saying was nonsense and ignored him. However, you'd be wrong to think I only have 2 of these fangs. Shall we start over? She said to Reinhardt. Will you be satisfied if I destroy all your weapons? If I lose my fangs, I'll fight with my nails. If I lose my nails, I'll fight with my bones. If I lose my bones, I'll fight with my life. That is how I, the bow hunter, do things. In that case, I'll just have to have you forsake your ideals. Elsa drew a third knife from her waist and held both at the ready. Worthy of the Spider-Woman insult that Subaru had lobbed at her before, Elsa seemed to fly about the room as though she were ignoring gravity, using all space on the ground and in the air available to her. As blade met blade and steel met steel, each violent collision sent sparks flying, kicking off from the walls and from the ceiling. Elsa continued her fighting style of attack and retreat. Reinhardt met her attacks as they came. As the battle seemed to go back and forth, Subaru gulped as he watched on. It can't be possible that even Reinhardt lacks the ability to settle this, can it? Elsa's abilities had stepped out of the realm of human possibility, and it was hard for Subaru to even track her movements. However, Reinhardt's ability was at its very core legendary. Their battle was like 2 gods colliding with each other in the heavens, but Subaru could see that, in terms of pure ability, Reinhardt was far ahead of Elsa. But then why was the battle still raging? We're holding him back, muttered Nosatella in response to Subaru's doubts as she continued to heal Rom. Huh? Replied Subaru, and Nosatella bit her lip, frustrated. Because I use spirit magic, he can't fight full force. At least not until I finish my healing. I have no idea what you're trying to say. If Reinhardt decides to fight full force, all of the mana in the atmosphere around us will turn away from me. I'm almost done. When I give the signal, call him out to him, okay? Okay. Subaru still didn't understand her explanation, but while still a little unsure, he agreed. The blue light continued to heal the bump protruding from Rom's head, and another wound that had been bleeding a little. Subaru looked on amazed as the traces of blood and the opening of the wound gradually disappeared, but Nosatella took a deep breath and let it out. I'm done. Leave it to me. Hey, Reinhardt! I don't really understand, but get her! Subaru delivered the message to Reinhardt, who had continually been on the defensive, that Rom's treatment was complete. Reinhardt glanced back. When his and Subaru's eyes met, he gave a slight nod. What is it you're going to show me? The House of Astria's sword, Reinhardt replied, in short and with dignity, as Elsa leaped at him. Immediately afterwards, Subaru felt all of the space in the cellar warp.